Greetings, Six Centers. It's your boy Darnell here with a disclaimer for the episode you're about to listen to. Joel and I recorded this episode on Sunday regarding the anti-racist section of the Ontario Grade 9 math curriculum. As of Wednesday, July 15th, Doug Ford removed the section from the curriculum. So when you listen to this episode, keep that in mind. But it does make you wonder why they would remove that section. Well, if you listen, you just might find out. All right, Denzel, it's your turn.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come one, come all. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
I'm weirdly excited about this one. I say weirdly.
Why are you excited? Huh?
I know weirdly is probably like, what? It's like my bread and butter. We're essentially talking about math, and math is sort of like an inherent language for me. Call it a gift from God.
Well, I would say like math for me, the first thing I think of Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. When I was dead broke, man, I couldn't picture this. 50-inch screen, money green leather sofa. Got 2 rods, a limousine, and a chauffeur. Phone bill about 2 G's flat. No need to worry. My accountant handles that. That's what I think of math. My accountant handles that.
Yeah, well, that even more how it aligns with me. Not that I'm your accountant or anything, but for me, like I ended up in accounting in that realm because I was good at math. I can remember back in like grade 2 when I was, my family was able to afford going to a private school. I was going to John Knox Christian School back in the day. That didn't last for long, but I was one of like 4 or 5 kids that when we got to the math section, I was like bumped up into like, I remember in grade 2 being like, oh, you're in the like advanced program or something. I don't even know. I just know that I would always go to a different room when it was time for math. Was I going to like the grade 3 class? I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you. I just remember that like even at an early age, I was doing strong in math.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think about shout out to a research consultant, Stefan Newstyle Dindal, aka the Econ Don, and he used to tell me like he's really good at math as well, and he said that for him he was pushed, I think by his grandmother and by his aunts to in math, and he ended up doing really well in it, so he did pretty good. For me, and I think this is why it makes this show so great, because here you are, the math whiz. And you got put in advanced programs, and here I am. I got put in the ESL programs, and I'm Canadian, right? So I you know what I mean? I graduated high school with a 53% average, like so. I wasn't even eligible to get into college. I had to apply as a mature student. So this is good.
Look at you now, bro. Look at you now.
Look at me now. Look at me now. I'm getting paper. No, right?
Well,
but
and I mean, it. To some extent, the math sort of stuck with me too. Like, I mean, in the sense of it played out in so many ways that like it was to my advantage. Now, was it just my mind was inclined that way? Like I see myself now, like I'm very, very analytical, and that sort of rigor of way of thinking. I want to say there's an innate component to it. But the reason why I said it was a blessing because when I was in university, people won't want to hear this to some extent, but I took math as electives because it was going to increase my GPA.
Whoa.
And like that, it's just, I get it. And what's really interesting is, when we talk about economics, the school of thought being that I, essentially call myself part of is Austrian economics. They are very critical of the use of mathematics. And I was taught economics using a lot of math. And I had the ability to, the reason why it's criticized is because people get stuck in creating the solution and not understanding the theory. But for me, it just worked out well that even though I was taught very mathematically economics, or taught economics in a mathematical sense, I was able to understand the theory. And I would say partly because I was so strong in math, because the math piece was just like, okay, yeah, get it, boom, done. Now, what's the point? Like, why are we doing this chart? What does this graph mean? What is this problem that we're solving? What is the actual principle at play that these numbers are demonstrating? And so it served me well, I think, in that, I was able to do really well in economics. But that said, I do recall my first year prof saying, generally speaking, those that did better in math did worse in economics, because you only really need basic algebra to do economics, or the math of economics. So I know a bit of a sidebar, but I'm just giving the listener a little insight into who I am and the mathematical thinking that I have.
Well, the joke is Mr. 53% high school average. I don't know, maybe my math was 50%, but now I'm teaching kids to do math. So now, like, I'm an educator teaching kids to do math. so that's funny. Shout
So
out
would
to
you
my professor.
say on that, like, there's an aspect of it's help, like I'll just oversimplify, your poor performance in some of those classes is making you a better educator?
Oh yeah. So I'm back on track now. Shout out to Professor Jeannie Kim. So she got me back on track. And so now I'm in a place where I'm a lot more confident in my math skills, and I'm able to see math from a failing perspective and from the kids who struggled. So where I can honestly say that, yeah, like, I was down and out, but I'm here. And if I could do it, you could do it, type of thing. So I think this will be a good conversation because you'll get both perspectives. Get both perspectives from Joel and I in the way we're looking at this curriculum. So if you didn't read the show notes or any of the details, we're talking about the new math curriculum in Ontario. And so the Ontario government released the province's new elementary math curriculum to better prepare students for work in a rapidly changing world, strengthen math competence, and improve grades. So the curriculum was developed over 2 years in consultation with parents, math educators, academics, and math education experts, and is designed to reverse a decade of declining math scores. It will be available to students across the province beginning in September 2020. And what's interesting about this is that the last update to Ontario's elementary math curriculum was 2005. Right? So the new math curriculum is what it does is it builds the understanding of the value and uses the use of money through mandatory financial literacy concepts. So for the first time, you could teach coding or computer programming skills starting in grade 1 to improve problem solving and fluency with technology to prepare students for jobs of the future. So you use relevant, current, and practical examples so students can connect math to everyday life. So it put a focus on fundamental math concepts and skills, such as learning and recalling number facts. So what we're going to be doing today, we're just going to be referencing this article from The Conversation website. The Conversation, Academic Rigor, Journalistic Flair. And the article is called 6 Changes in Ontario's Not So Basic New Elementary Math Curriculum. And it's by Priscilla Coria. And yeah, we'll put that in our show notes. But just in regards to the direction Joel and I are going, we're going to talk about financial literacy and the controversial section in the grade 9. We're focusing, particularly on the grade 9 section. And so we're going to look at financial literacy. We're going to look at the social emotional learning, financial literacy, and then we're looking at the principles underlying the grade 9 mathematics curriculum. So, Joel, what do you think of the article, the six changes?
Yeah, I think it did a good job of like giving some high level summaries. I think a couple of the categories. First one, I thought they did a good job of talking about timetables, and I really like the discussion where it talks about recall and demonstrate, meaning it's not just memorization, but also understand. The demonstration isn't, hey, I memorized my timetables, but demonstrating that they actually understand what the timetables are supposed to teach. So there's stuff like that I thought the article did a really good job of, giving an understanding of what the changes were. So really 1, 2, and 6 are the ones we're not going to touch on too much. I think for the most part, because I don't want to say there's no controversy, but they're more structural changes as opposed to sort of content, if that makes sense. At least that's the way I saw it. So, but in general, I thought this was a good article that gives a very high level of the changes, because if you're trying to really, you're not going to be able to get a good understanding of what changed if you just pump through the curriculum link that or some of the curriculum links that we'll provide, because there's just so much content there. So I think it's a good high level summary. I think it did bring up some things that made me want to question, and I think we'll jump into that shortly. But I think it highlights the things that potentially are problematic without really. I want to say it doesn't seem to be overly positive or critical. It's just very like, here's what it is. I don't know. Did you get that impression as well, or did it seem to have like I essentially I'm saying there's a bit of a lack of opinion, which I think we need more of in the new in articles.
No, it was just a simple overview. Nothing too controversial, but it was good to get another perspective outside of the generic flow of the Ontario curriculum. So what we see here, the 6 things that Priscilla pointed out was times tables. So Education Minister Stephen Lecce introduced the new math curriculum, noting that memorizing times table was back. So that's good. Memorizing timetables is good. You should know your times tables. Thematic organization changes, that's point number 2. So there were some changes to strands, big umbrella themes of how curriculum is organized. Okay, that's cool. Reorganizing curriculum. Social emotional learning, we'll definitely get to that. Financial literacy, we'll get to that. Coding is number 5. Coding and modeling. And then 6 earlier approaches.
Mm-hmm. And I think for 6, to oversimplify it, it's a bit of, they're like the example they given is some stuff's taught in grade 6 as opposed to 7 or 8.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay. What'd you think of the coding and the modeling?
So I you said something earlier that I think is I want to be critical of it because I'm concerned. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my initial perceptions aren't totally reflective, but you use the terminology in your initial summary about coding where they're like preparing for the future and the technological influence. I want to say that that's like 20 years too late. Like if that was the statement they made 20 years ago about incorporating coding, I would say this is very forward looking. I see that there's some accuracy there. My concern, and I'm not saying that coding and modeling doesn't belong. I think it's great that they're incorporating it. My concern is that their arrogance that this is going to help people in the future, because it fails to acknowledge that 20 years ago you should have made that a statement as well, and you failed. Not because they didn't see it coming, or sorry, not because that they saw it coming and chose not to do it, but because innovation is something that you don't centrally plan. These discoveries and innovations occur with, if we knew that they were coming, they would already be here. And so my concern with the coding example, to be overly simplistic, is like, are they teaching the concepts of coding, or are they teaching, a particular coding language, or oversimplifying coding to be like, hey, this is how you do a particular type of coding, and as opposed to teaching the concepts. And my attitude, generally speaking, I always have the concern that our education system is teaching you what to learn, not how to learn. And so is the same thing being applied here? Are you teaching people how to understand coding, what the value of coding is, how there's nuance to coding? Are you teaching them fundamental skills that they can apply to various types of coding in very different contexts? Or are you being very particular and here's what you need to learn so that you understand coding in the future? That to me is the arrogant statement, or the ignorance of the future, that I go back to. Hey, yeah, if this was 20 years ago, that statement makes sense because hindsight's 2020. So I'll say that for the listener, there's a link I'll put in the show notes page called mathbot.com, and it's learn math by programming a robot, from counting to calculus. So to me, this is an example of using math and programming to sort of teach the concepts without, it's fun, it's enjoyable for kids. It's trying to be a different method, and I think this version of coding is teaching the concepts of coding. And again, I don't know the nuance, I don't know the specifics. There's, this curriculum is going to take a couple years to sort of play out what does that look like. So I know, I would say that my criticisms are more about concern of what is this going to look like, as opposed to, oh, here's how they're failing. But I like it in general as a concept that it's included.
Okay, good. Okay, so and now looking at social emotional learning, the social emotional learning aspect of the math curriculum. So there's a note in the curriculum that says, "Why is my child learning this?" And so it says, so the reason why the kids are learning this is to build their social emotional learning skills, such as learning to recognize and identify emotions that support mathematical learning, and then also build their confidence and develop a healthy relationship with math. What do you think about that, Joel?
So when I see this, my first instinct is emotional intelligence, or there's like emotional quotient, EQ. Remember back when we had Joseph Smith, Dr. Joseph Smith, way back. I want to say
Joseph
season
Smith,
one.
yeah.
Season one. So like, or maybe season two. Not sure.
Season one for sure.
He was talking about, this is what his and his generation chosen. They're part of what they do, right? Is teaching kids how to recognize their emotions and respond to them. So that aspect of the school system, of education, I think is important. I find it slightly peculiar that it's part of the math curriculum. Not to say, like, I would agree that I think this skill has some nuance, and I can get into it in a bit. But
yeah, but sorry, I just wanted to add. Yeah, so that was episode 27 you were referencing, real solutions to gun violence with Dr. Joseph Smith.
Thanks. Yeah, and so with this, I think there's some nuance where math might present good opportunities to apply. What's the terminology again? Social emotional learning. As I said, emotional intelligence, EQ, social skills I think are sort of a derivative of that. If you recognize your own emotions, you start to be able to recognize that in other people, and there's some reciprocal there. So I think the concept is important. I think it's important to be in the education. I find it very, very peculiar that it's in the math curriculum as opposed to, let's say, an application of this concept for the teachers while teaching math. Now, that might sound a little bit funky,
Mhm.
and I'll unpack it in a second, but I wanted to understand for you, like, what's your thoughts on this? Do you, and I would say in general, with your experience in the classroom teaching, what do you find valuable, or where do you find social emotional sort of learning, or the concepts that they have written here being applied?
Yeah, no, this is man, I wish I had this when I was a kid, man. Uh, my form of a social emotional learning was what my mom would call hot licks. That was it. You just got beating if you got the question wrong. And the more you cried and the more you acted up, she said, "Yeah, I'll give you something to cry about." The situation would just escalate. So,
Ugh.
praise God for social emotional learning in math. That's the first thing that comes to my head. I'm like, oh man, maybe this would have changed my life. But
Maybe your
yeah,
moms
I
needed
use
to
this.
learn about
I
this.
use this. Yeah, yo. But I use it a lot. I use it a lot in class, because I'm constantly having to coach kids through the frustrations of doing math and sympathizing, empathizing with them, putting my feet in their shoes and consoling them and building up their self esteem. So yeah, this is everyday stuff. It's practical. It works. And I actually enjoy it. So it's cool.
Mhm. Okay, so let me unpack sort of my criticism a little bit more. For So it said, the article that we were from the conversation that in the first sentence or first paragraph about this section, it says both math and the health and physical education new curricula now teach social emotional learning. So, um, I my point is that I think it's weird that it's taught in math. I think it makes sense to be applied in math. And the second paragraph, they sort of identify why I would agree. And that is considering the feelings students may encounter when doing mathematics, such as confusion, frustration, anxiety, anger, hopelessness, among others, addressing social emotional skills is crucial. So when I think about math in contrast with other classes or subjects, because math is generally so objective, meaning you have a right answer or a wrong answer. It When you have the wrong answer, there's no like, oh, like think about spelling. Okay, I got one letter wrong. I got most of the word right, but I got one letter wrong. If you remember the answer keys for your math textbook or your math questions, you don't even know where you went wrong unless you have a really complex answer key that gives you all the details of how they get the answer, which most of the time that's not there. Most of the time it's just answer question 3B is 45. And you're like, I got 42. Uh-oh. So that sort of like abrupt I'm wrong and not knowing where, why, and how, I can understand where in math it is frustrating. It is, going to cause you to get angry or confused. And I would say I can recall doing like university math classes and like, yeah, for sure, being like pulling on my hair, like, oh my goodness, why can't I get this? Doesn't make any sense. And like over and over again, trying to figure out the problem. And then, having a sense of accomplishment when I got through it, I think, for um, my own sake, when I succeeded, it because I had so much success in math, those moments of failure or struggling, I was okay with. But if you have that failure early on, needing the skills to regulate and manage your emotions, I think is very important. So to reiterate my point, I think there's a really good application of this social emotional learning in the math class. I just find it peculiar that it's part of the curriculum. That just seems, maybe it's from my ignorance of the curriculums, but I think to me, having the social emotional learning sort of, let's call it curriculum, that you're teaching through health and physical education, or let's think of like elementary school classes, part of your like core teacher class, that makes more sense to me. And then you apply during this context, or be prepared as a teacher to apply those skills that you've been teaching. I just don't think math is the the context that you should be teaching these skills. I guess is really, or that's where my concern lies. That math
Mhm.
class is where you teach these skills. it just, yeah, it seems peculiar.
Mhm.
So I think, as you described, if you had those skills, you would have potentially maybe fought through your struggles in math better. Like, would you agree with that? Would you say that that's what you were saying, that when you said, "Oh, I wish I had this," is that sort of what you mean? That like
I
when
don't think
you were
that.
struggling?
No, no. I'm gonna get to my point.
Okay.
No, I'm gonna get to my point.
Okay.
I'm gonna get to
Okay.
my point. But no, that wouldn't help me.
Okay. Cool. All right.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well. Okay. So let's jump to point 2. Right, about the financial literacy and why is my child learning this. So basically, the reason why students are learning this financial literacy portion is that they're to build their financial literacy by learning to manage finances, such as working with budgets and understanding appreciation and depreciation of assets, and now analyze various financial situations and learn how math can be applied to make informed decisions. For example, understanding shifts in the stock market. Examine how interest rates, down payments, and other factors impact purchasing decisions.
so I think my first instinct is to go back to the we posted on our Facebook page a while back, about there was an article from Narcity uh, called "Ontario will now teach students how to apply for a mortgage and pay off debt in grade 9." And my quick-witted response to to the post that we put out there was, I don't think our government is qualified to teach students about managing debt. And I mean, as much as I'm being, silly and
Okay.
witty,
Okay.
I think the point is that, our government just accumulates debt. They live on debt. And I would say taking there's an appropriate use of debt and there's a bad use of debt. And
Mhm.
my
I agree.
concern is that they really don't differentiate the two. While they'll teach you how to understand debt and financial calculations, let's say, um, like in as you put it, um, it's gonna help examine decisions, right? I think you made stock market change, right? So using the finance, let's say math or mathematical finance, being able to apply it is one thing. But what are good and bad decisions are a whole different thing. And that's where I would say I don't trust the government, or I don't think the government's going to be teaching in a positive manner about debt, or let's say when to be weary of debt. What's your initial take on the financial literacy?
I think I'm from a person that's coming from a place of financial illiteracy. I got myself into a lot of trouble in my early years financially because I wasn't literate. I didn't know how to manage my money or finances or understand financial terminology. And now I'm at a place where I am learning it and I'm being empowered. And so now when I hear people talk about financial literacy, I'm kind of skeptical about it because like what I'm learning is that financial literacy isn't about necessarily about your IQ, but it's about your EQ,
Mm.
your emotional intelligence. And so one of the books that was helpful for me in kind of changing my life, like almost, I don't want to, I hope I'm not exaggerating if I use this word. Um, I've been regenerated. This is
Heresy.
this is my third conversion. This is the, so this is like my third conversion. People are like third conversion. You mean second? No, I mean third. My second conversion was me becoming reformed, but that's a whole nother conversation. So, the book I was reading was why A students work for C students and B students work for the government by Robert Kiyosaki, the author of
Rich Dad,
Rich
Poor Dad.
Dad Poor Dad. And actually, I got pardon.
I said Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Sorry.
Yeah, Rich Dad Poor Dad. Yeah. And so, I got this book from referenced from this guy named King Randall. You can follow King Randall on Twitter at New Emerging King. And so basically, he's this young black guy in Atlanta in his 20s. Basically, took these young brothers from his community under his wing. They basically were flunking out of school and they had no future. And he basically took them under his wing, and started just mentoring them and teaching them. And he read this book, and he got his stuff together financially, and he got some money together and bought a vacant school, and he opened up his own school, and he's teaching these guys life skills and how to how to survive, how to be financially literate, and even just practical. So that kind of inspired me. He said, I read it, he didn't put it down, and it changed his life. I read it, finished it like in about 2 days, didn't put it down, and changed my life. But anyways, so after reading that, I was kind of like, okay, well, what is financial literacy, and what do we mean by emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence? So for example, like just very basic, here's 10 things that you can do. Some of it is intellectual, but some of it is emotional intelligence that can build your financial wealth. So 1, be an entrepreneur, own your own business. Okay, fine, simple. 2, build a team of advisors, attorneys, accountants, and other entrepreneurs. That's emotional intelligence. Understand how to use debt. Okay, that's intellectual. 4, understand tax laws. Okay, that's intellectual. 5, develop high emotional intelligence. 6, set high standards for legal, ethical, and moral character and practices. Right? That is emotional. Right? 7, be a real estate investor. Intellectual. 9, dedicate time to financial education and putting what you learn to work. That's emotional. And then 10, develop strong communication and people skills. That's emotional. Right? And so the point I'm making is that financial literacy is something that is a lifestyle, right? It isn't just something that you study, but it's actually a way how you live. Albert Einstein said this: education is what remains after one has forgotten what one has learned in school, right? So meaning financial literacy, like I said, is a lifestyle. So if you like drip or like looking fresh to death, right, then that's going to become a hindrance to your financial literacy if you're always trying to get the new Jordans, or just always trying to level up and floss and pop your collar in front of your friends, right? So living in a free country means you have the freedom to choose to be rich, poor, or middle class. But I think that choice starts at home and outside of school. What about you?
Yeah, I think, when you first said about it being emotional or emotional intelligence, the thought that came to mind is 2 things. Have you ever heard, the concept of FOMO, fear of missing out? But also
Mofo?
MOFO? What's MOFO? I said FOMO, fear of missing out.
Oh, I think you said. Oh, never mind. This is a kid's show. This is a Christian show.
Yeah.
You'll be
MOFO
saved.
is a whole different conversation. So with the reason why FOMO is relevant is, to make money in, let's say, the stock market, you buy low and sell high. But generally speaking, people buy high and sell low because of FOMO, right? So when everyone's, hyped up about an asset, that's when you're buying. That's your emotions driving you to make a purchase. And I'm using stocks as an example. And then when the market crashes, out of your fear, you turn around and sell. The statement that I hear from some investor people that I sort of follow is trade the plan. And the reason that sort of applies here is because you need to recognize when your emotions are driving your decisions. And if your emotions are driving your decisions, I know this isn't really what you were talking about, but if your emotions are driving your decisions, a lot of times you're going to potentially ignore the financial components as you went through that list. Oh, that one's financial. Oh, that one's financial, right? So there's a combination of the two, and your emotional intelligence plays a role in the relationships and networks that you're building in order to make wise investments. But there's also an aspect of recognizing your emotional responses that is so important to making wise decision making. Because I was just gonna say the worst thing you can do is make a decision under pressure. It's like me with a perfect example for me. I had a minor car. Well, we got rear-ended in my car, and the amount of damage
I
was
saw that.
just under the amount that would needed to write off my car. The last thing I wanted them to do is write off my car, because when I buy a car, I want to spend lots of time taking my time, finding my options, figure out, okay, what's the value for my money? What do I really want? What am I willing to sacrifice? What do I need? And find the right option. If I had to write my vehicle off, I'd have to buy a car in a week, and I'm pretty much going to not be happy with my purchase, because I'm making a decision under that confined, stressed time constraint. So while that's a little bit less about emotions, it's still, I lack the capacity to make a wise decision and do all of the things that I want to do. And that's it. Where it relates is when you're high stressed, emotional, that's a similarity when you're forced into making a decision tomorrow, because you're acting quickly. Your chance of either being rash or not making the best decision if you had taken more time.
Yeah. I got this new book called The Intelligent Investor, the definitive book on value investing by Benjamin Graham. And then the preface and appendix is by Warren Buffett. So I've been working my way through that and trying to trying to grow my knowledge in financial literacy. And even like one of the simple things that was helpful for me in thinking these things through was that looking at me as a person and the way how I think. And I like to have control over things. I don't really like to leave things up to chance. I always like to be in control of certain of things. So when it came to like investments and everybody riding the Bitcoin wave, not to say that it's wrong, just me emotionally, there was always something I felt uncomfortable about in going into it. And I always thought it was intellectual, but when I finally understood what it was for me, not speaking against it, I'm just saying for me, I would prefer investments that I had more control over, because that's how emotionally I was wired. So just real quick, just if you guys are kind of
would you
following
agree?
my train of thought. So
I just want to ask you quickly, would you agree that the control relates to the fact of understanding? Like with Bitcoin, I would say a lot of people don't understand the technology. They don't understand really what they're investing in a contrast to like a company.
No, not necessarily that. Yes, you have a point. But for me, it was just more so having something in my hand. Like the investment I want is something I can hold in my hand, where I don't like things being out of my control. If I can have control, like for example, when I used to play sports, I don't like not being the leader. I want the ball in my hands at the end of the game. You know what I mean? Like I don't want people to have my fate in their hands. So if I can have as much control as possible, then I'm going to fight to gain that control. I'd rather die by my own sword than somebody else's, if that makes sense. And so, there's three types of income, right? That Kiyosaki talks about. He talks about ordinary income, portfolio income, and passive income. And the portfolio income is more so aligned with stocks, and then the passive income has to do more with
income generating,
real estate. And then pardon?
Income generating, but yes, real estate's the most common.
Yeah. And then ordinary income, what we do with our 9 to 5. So the ordinary income is earned income Portfolio income is capital gains income, and then passive income is cash flow income. And just for me, I realized that me emotionally, where I was at, I felt more comfortable with something that I can possibly put my hands on. And yeah, and that's all. That's all I was just saying in regards to financial literacy. So when I'm looking at the school curriculum and seeing how that goes, I think that yeah, it has to. It's a lot deeper than just knowing what to do, but it's a lifestyle that you have to learn um, in your home, right?
Mhm.
Rich people teach their kids how to be rich, and I tweeted this the other day. It's a responsibility. I no longer believe that that generational wealth is easy. I don't believe that anymore. Of where I'm at today, meaning that when it comes to generational wealth, um, it's a responsibility, right? It's a huge responsibility to manage that money and to understand how to maintain that wealth. So for the person who worked hard to attain it, now you're going to pass it on, but your kid's a loser.
If you don't,
Well, you know, pardon?
if you don't educate them,
Sorry.
if you don't educate them,
Well, not well, but no. Okay, no. Well, no. Actually, I would kind of disagree with that.
okay,
Because there's a point where the person who's going to inherit it doesn't want to. They don't want to inherit the wealth. And I remember Shaquille O'Neal said this to his son. He's like, "Yo, you got to have 3 degrees to touch my cheese. You got to have 3 degrees to touch my cheese." And you're like, "What the fray? Like 3 degrees, Dad? Like, geez, like, why can't I just inherit it and chill?" I saw a meme with Jackie Chan.
Mhm.
Jackie Chan is not passing his money down to his kid, right? He's like, "No, well, he can earn his own money.
Mm.
Like, this is mine." Right.
Yeah.
So there's points where, you know, and even just this happens in my own home because, you know, I've been having this conversation with my family, and, you know, there's people in my family who are saying like, "Yo, I don't want to inherit that wealth." My own blood, people in my family saying like, "Yo, actually, you know what, Darnell, on the low, I don't even want to inherit that wealth." And I would say, well, why not? Because it's work. It's too much work to do that. I'd rather not inherit it. So the point I'm making is just that that wealth is not easy. And anybody that talks about, you know, wealth is easy doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're financially illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, no, I
That's
think
what I
that's
was
a fair
thinking.
point. And
But
I
yeah.
think financial illiteracy is something that I think you sort of touched this earlier, but like most people don't realize how illiterate they are when it comes to finance. You know, the example that
Until you get calls from collectors and then they're
Well-
garnishing your wages.
well, and but even that, like, I guarantee you, those people aren't realizing the reason they're in that situation is because they're financially illiterate. They think it's because they have,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
whatever the reason, right? I ran into some bad luck, or
Or the system.
the system's
Or the
holding me
system.
down, or you know, I don't make enough money, right? They're not going, oh,
Mhm.
it's because of my financial
Yeah.
illiteracy. It's because I made some bad decisions. And to me, the best example, I think,
Yeah.
I hope, you know, for the listener, if this applies to you, you know, feel free to reach out to me and I can explain why it doesn't quite work this way. But so I had a sales agent, a car salesman tell me that the vast majority of people will take 0% financing all the time. And sometimes it's not the numbers, if you understood finances, if you knew how things worked and you ran the numbers, you would be like, so let me give you the example. I'll just make them up. Because I'm not giving all the variables, I can't say which scenario totally works out as better. But if I had a $30,000 car and I'd give you $2,000 off, but you had 0.9% interest, or you pay the full 30 and 0% interest. Again, depends on the time frame, number of years, and payment schedules and all that stuff to figure out which one of the two is better. But the car salesman was like, everybody picks 0% interest because they just default, oh, well, 0 is better than 1%. But it's 28,000 at 1%, and 30,000 at 0%. At some point, like there's a time factor that makes one of them better than the other. But it's financial literacy that just causes people to go, well, 0 is better than 1 in terms of interest rate. So, this is where I thought that hopefully what the system is trying to do, what the program is trying to do, as they summarized it, the objective, I think is, as when you were describing it, Darnell, the line or the way that I remember it was, that it will provide the ability to examine how interest rates, down payments, and other factors will impact decisions. Right. So that is where I think financial literacy is definitely lacking. And I'm hoping that these changes will help in that regard, to be able to say, oh, when is the 0% interest versus cash back up front a better option, as opposed to, illiteracy just going 0% is better.
Okay. And so now the last part, we're looking at the principles underlying the grade 9 mathematics curriculum. Now there's various principles, but there was one principle that caught a lot of people's eye, and that's been trending on social media and Twitter. Okay, so this is an equitable mathematics curriculum recognizes that mathematics can be subjective. Mathematics is often positioned as an objective and pure discipline. However, the content and the context in which it is taught, the mathematicians who are celebrated, and the importance that is placed upon mathematics by society are subjective. Mathematics has been used to normalize racism and marginalization of non-Eurocentric mathematical knowledges, and a decolonial, anti-racist approach to mathematics education makes visible its historical roots and social constructions. The Ontario Grade 9 mathematics curriculum emphasizes the need to recognize and challenge systems of power and privilege, both inside and outside the classroom, in order to eliminate systemic barriers and to serve students belonging to groups that have been historically disadvantaged and underserved in mathematics education.
How's that word salad?
Okay, well, Mr. Mathematician, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I earlier already mentioned math is objective, and clearly this statement is, saying no, it's subjective. So I think it's important to recognize that. I think there's a lot of, there's some truths in here that I'm not, perfect example, right? Let's take the last part, saying there are students belonging to groups that have been historically disadvantaged and underserved in mathematics education. That can be true while denying that math is subjective, and that the lack of recognizing it's subjective is the cause. So the point I'm trying to get at is by attacking or criticizing this, principle that they're trying to apply, I'm not necessarily saying some of the other things in this paragraph are or aren't true. So let's use the punchline that I love to make about stats. Stats don't lie, but liars use stats. This is being conflated in this statement. So the first part, stats don't lie, is that stats are objective. Mathematics is objective. It is the application of numbers and data, i.e., liars use stats, is the application of numbers, mathematics, that has a subjective nature to it, because you're taking objective things and drawing derivatives or principles or concepts or conclusions from that. And that is where the subjective nature can occur. But technically, that's not math. That's not math that is subjective. Mm-hmm. And I think I could be wrong. The example that they say math has been used to normalize racism. I think most people has heard about or is familiar with the idea that there are racial disparities when it comes to IQ testing. So I would argue that is an objective data point. For argument's sake, let's say that the IQ tests are relatively reliable, and there's no concern there. I just want to park that for argument's sake. Someone who draws a conclusion that because a particular minority group has an average lower IQ is somehow less than, or a lower race, or whatever, let's say racial position they want to derive from that. That is not, mathematics. That is somebody using data to argue a point. But why does a lower IQ inherently mean that the race is inferior, or any sort of, racial similar claim, or I should say, derogatory racial claim? It doesn't. And this is the problem. They're not separating false or bad uses of data or bad conclusions that are subjective from the objective science. And so the point, the other, for me, it's go back to what we talk about with the concern about the anti-racist approach. The anti-racist approach is about equal outcome. And now maybe some people would say that's an oversimplification. Fine. But when it comes to math, when they're talking about mathematics being unequitable, the whole point is that the different races some races are scoring poorly and more poorly than others. It sounds like the solution they're proposing is to address the subjective nature of math, not to address what are the underlying issues that may result in the very last sentence. Students belonging to groups that have been historically disadvantaged and underserved. Right? What is there? Problem-solving examples that, let's say, students with English as a second language aren't served properly because the problems, the word examples don't work for them, and so therefore they're going to learn more slowly because of the language issue that they're going to ESL class as you got put into. And these are just questions that I'm posing to say, like, that's a fair question, but that has nothing to do with objective or subjective. That has to do with the method that it's being taught, and as opposed to the actual content itself being subjective. The only other thing I did want to say is that there is an aspect where this sentence where here it's saying that the mathematicians who are celebrated and the importance placed on mathematics in society is subjective. Is there some truth there? Is there room for criticism that maybe, like, the thought that came to mind when you were reading this is, remember the movie The Hidden Figures?
Yeah.
Right? Like, is that an example where society did certain things that now we look back and go, hey, these were prominent black women who were basically not given enough recognition,
right?
But that doesn't have to. Now, the second part here where it says mathematics by society is subjective, that one I think is a bit squirrely. I have a bit of concern there, and because I think, are you going to say that we should not consider being strong in math as important as historically? I don't know if that's a good approach. Is that actually going to lead to more human flourishing? Now, obviously, maybe that's not the point. Maybe that's not the claim. But the importance placed upon mathematics by society, I would suggest that, that's a skill that we don't want to undervalue. And that's sort of my concern with the terminology, that you would start to diminish the value because, oh, guess what? When we count the math scores less and we increase the value of other scores, now, we made the outcomes more equal. But all you did was just play games with numbers. So I know I went on my little tirade about, math being objective. What's your concern, or where do you think maybe I went wrong in my critique?
Well, no, it's warranted. It's warranted. It was helpful. What you said was warranted. I definitely, the part about the mathematicians that you pointed out was interesting. It made me think of um, theologians in Christianity, in the church. I think it's kind of the same argument against yeah against the but it happens in the church actually, that same argument. So it's kind of familiar to see that. But I would say just in general, that the burden of proof is on um is on the curriculum and the people who put it together on how that's going to be done. Because I'm just thinking like, okay, well, okay, uh, how sway right right how Joel, like, I'm curious to how would I do a lesson plan to to do this. So for example, um a sentence that says mathematics has been used to normalize racism and marginalization of non-Eurocentric mathematical knowledges, and the decolonial anti-racist approach to mathematics education makes visible its historical roots in social constructions. How? Right? So they pointed
Mhm.
that out, but how? Like
Yeah. What is the
how
thing they're addressing? Is that sort of the question you're asking?
yeah, like how are how would you address that? And then the other part was the Ontario grade 9 mathematics curriculum emphasizes the need to recognize and challenge systems of power and privilege both inside and outside the classroom in order to eliminate systemic barriers and to serve students belonging to groups that have been historically disadvantaged and underserved in mathematics education. How? Like
Well, and
how is that going to be done? And so
and
it
that's why I
almost
focused on the second part of that sentence, because like I was sort of saying, okay, that might be true, but I don't see how. So that again, students belonging to groups that have historically been disadvantaged and underserved in mathematics. The first part of the sentence, in my opinion, and tell me if I'm wrong, is basically assuming, well, this is due to racism, powers, and privilege. Like, and I think your question of like, well, how are you addressing this? By just calling it systemic barriers, systemic racism, systemic, power and privilege concepts. Like, am I wrong? Is that what you're sort of saying? Like, how is that actually going to do something, or how is that going to change something?
well, no, that's not what I was saying. Not more so like how am I going to teach this? So like
Mm.
what are the lines of continuity that you're going to draw to do this? So they're acknowledging it, and that's the point I was making, was that um it sounds like kind of that idea of uh the blue sky, right? This is what salesmen or saleswomen call the blue sky, saying anything to make a sale. Like this stuff sounds great and it sounds current, sounds
Yeah, it
woke.
fits the narrative.
Yeah, and my question is how, like, and how's that going to be done? And then of course, like the previous part that I just pointed out, the part about context, right? However, the content and the context in which it is taught, the mathematicians who are celebrated, and the importance that is placed upon mathematics by society are subjective. And that's, to me, that's worrisome, in that yeah, it conflates the definition of what objectivity actually is and subjectivity. But of course, that's, you're going to lose that if you're coming from a postmodern perspective, and everything is relative, and you don't have a context for what's objectively true, right? So for example, content, using the same thing, content and context, right? Content is key, but context is king. And so it's important to make sure that both aspects, just like, and I use I said theologians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mathematicians, um, right? I think about theologians, and there are theologians who've done things wrong, and who yeah, who have sketchy pasts, or are sinners, and they're just sinners because that's how they are. But there are true things that have been said. Same thing with Christians when we look at unbelievers. Unbelievers can speak truth. Unbelievers can do good things, even though they're sinners. So you don't want to rule out something because of the origin where it comes from, right? That's to commit the genetic fallacy, right? Something is flawed because of where it comes from, right? Romans 14:14.
The mathematician was a slave owner, therefore his conclusions are racist.
Yeah. Romans 14:14. Nothing is evil in and of itself, and so we don't want to commit the genetic fallacy and basically write something off because of the origin of where it comes from, right? We always look at the outcome and what it produces, and we judge things based on the outcome. So we do the math, right? 1 + 1 = 2, right? So we do the math to make sure everything adds up and it's right, right? We don't say, well, Joel said 1 + 1 is 2, so it's wrong because Joel is a racist. So, right? We do the math, right? We don't just write it off because of the person who told us 1 + 1 = 2. Yeah, but what's your whole 2 cents on this issue, man?
I mean, I wanna start by quoting John Taylor Gatto, and if people don't know who he is, essentially, I'll just read I think it's from his Wikipedia, but when I see it in Google, I'll have a link to his about me on his website. But John Taylor Gatto was a American author and school teacher. After teaching for nearly 30 years, he authored several books on education, criticizing its ideology, history, and consequences. So there's 2 quotes. The first is I'll put a video in the link saying why public schools and mainstream media dumb us down. So this is where I'm stealing the quotes from. But they're his quotes from 2 of his books. So I'm only stealing a really short piece, but from his book, Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto, he says, schools are intended to produce formulaic human beings whose behavior can be predicted and controlled. The second quote is from his book, Weapons of Mass Instruction. And it says, what shocks is that we should so eagerly have adopted one of the very worst aspects of Prussian culture, an education system that is deliberately designed to produce mediocre intellects, to hamstring the inner life, to deny students the appreciable leadership skills, and to ensure docile and incomplete citizens, all in order to render the populace manageable. And the reason I wanted to read those is we're adding this financial literacy, this math, needs to a system that this is a teacher who's been in the system for 30 years criticizing the system. And it's to recognize that the inherent structure of the school system is, in my opinion, as I've just stated, it's not to teach people how to learn. It's to teach people what to learn, or to teach them what we want them to know. And all of these things, I think the as you described it, the math wokeness, I think, or the wokeness of this equitable mathematics point, or the subjective nature of mathematics, is an example of they're embedding. They want to teach people about the systems of power and privilege. They want to teach people about how society has normalized racism and marginalized non-Eurocentric mathematical knowledge. Right? They're embedding that into the curriculum because that's what they want to teach. As you sort of pointed out, okay, like how? Because it doesn't matter how. It's about this is the content they want to teach. So my overly critical perspective of this is I have huge concerns that government, in their arrogance, is going to teach coding in a way that doesn't actually prepare for the future. That, this mathematical components to the curriculum, again, is still the same problem. It's teaching what to learn, not how to learn. I know that's maybe an oversimplification.
No, it's not. It's not.
But I do think some of the changes they're making are valuable. I think, having social emotional learning in the school system as part of education is important. But I just don't trust government to be the method to deliver this in a way that puts human flourishing first. I would argue government bodies, bureaucrats, primary focus uh, is about maintaining control and power, and we essentially, without going down the rabbit hole, we're sort of getting into the conversation about public choice economics. So for you, Darnell, what do you want to leave the listener with? What do you think they can learn about, or should understand about the changes to the math curriculum, and maybe what they should be concerned about, or what they should be encouraged of?
Yeah, so I would say that it reminds me of something that the late R.C. Sproul said, and that there's no such thing as a neutral education. There's no such thing as a neutral education. So all curriculums are geared towards producing a particular outcome, a particular kind of person. So as a parent, you have to ask your child's school teacher or the superintendent, principal, what kind of person um, do you plan to make my child to be?
Mm,
Right?
hmm
What kind of person do you want my child to be? Are you geared to trying to do? Because all curriculum works backwards, right? You start with the end in mind, and then the curriculum will work backwards to create that outcome, right? So for you as a parent, you kind of have to have in your mind, like, okay, this is the plan. My plan is X for my kid, but you want Y for my kid. So you're in conflict there. Now, if your school wants Y, you want Y, then it's
Golden.
cool. But I think when it comes to financial literacy, I think it's the same education. Meaning, education is the same whether you're doing math, you're doing English, or you're learning to play quarterback. Right? It's the same thing. So if my goal, because people might follow the sports analogy, so if or basketball, we use basketball. If my goal is to um, get my kid to the NBA, then um, relying on the gym teacher to teach basketball in gym class is not
Probably not a good
going. Is well, every hooper, anybody that does sports already knows. Like, look, man, we're trying to get you to the league, you know. So we can't rely on the gym teacher in the gym curriculum. Nobody says, hey, yo, we need to revive the gym curriculum so that it can get, more players to the league. Nobody says that, because that doesn't make sense. The onus is on the parent. Same thing with financial literacy. And I'm sure those parents who have, a lot of money saved up and have financial plans and have wealth already, they're not asking, they're not saying, oh, we should get the school to teach our kids to be financially literate. Those parents don't say things like that. Just like parents who are trying to get their kids to the league, they don't say, hey, we need to get the gym teacher to learn more about how to play triple threat and score off of 2 dribbles and, pull up from the logo.
No,
Right?
those are the those
That's
are the,
that's
the
not how it
parents-
works.
They put their kid in the boarding school where gym class is that sport.
Yeah. Right. So, and that's just something to think about. Like, the parents who are financially literate don't say things like that. Usually it's the ones who aren't financially literate who say that, right? Because at the end of the day, um, it's all competition, right? Our economy is competition. School is still competition, right? The people you're sitting beside are still your competitors for jobs and future things like that. So you have to remember that my point I'm making is that education is not neutral, and it's not fair. But that's the essence of education, because you got to kind of give yourself an advantage over your peers, right? Now there's a quote. From Theodore Dalrymple. He's a English cultural critic and prison physician and psychiatrist, and he said this: "To overturn a prejudice is not to destroy prejudice, but to replace it with another prejudice. Right? And so there's no such thing as a neutral education. So as it relates to financial literacy, I believe it starts at home and ends at home. A school may teach your child for a semester or a year, but a parent is a teacher for life. Let us know what you guys think. Were we fair? Did we miss anything? Would you like us to do a follow-up episode? You can contact us at sixcentsreport@gmail.com. If you're trying to get in touch with Joel, what do you got to do?
TJoelN39 everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you want to see my content, mostly Instagram stories is sort of what I've been reverting to. I'm sort of off Facebook as much as I can. I used to be pretty heavy in Facebook, but Instagram stories is sort of the easy option for me now. Try to limit my social media time,
Okay, cool. Yeah, and you can reach me on Twitter or Instagram. Do good at Darnell, DOGUDDA _ Darnell or Darnell Samuels on Facebook.
And give us your 2 cents. Tell us what we did right, what we did wrong. Like, share, comment. Give us a rating on your podcast catcher. Whatever you can do.
Give us a review.
Yeah. Whatever you can do that sort of helps us grow our audience. We appreciate it. So
6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.